I stood there staring at the cracked, parched earth of the family estate, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the delusional failure my father called me. But looking at that dust, I could still hear his voice, the voice that had for years been the soundtrack to my deepest insecurities. "You're chasing ghosts, Elias," he had spat, his eyes cold as stone. "You want to spend your life looking at dirt and talking to seeds. You're an embarrassment. You're wasting your life on a fantasy while your brothers build legacies. When you fail, and you will, don't come looking for a place at this table." That was the moment the world broke. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the certainty in his voice. He wasn't just doubting me. He was dismissing my very soul. So I left. I walked away from the dinner table, away from the laughter of my cousins who mocked my ridiculous obsession with soil health and regenerative ecology, and I walked into the nothingness. The departure wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, lonely, and smelled of dry heat and desperation. I had no inheritance, no safety net, and a bank account that hovered dangerously close to zero. I spent the first 3 years living out of a rusted truck, sleeping in fields that were just as barren as the ones I had tried to save. Every time a setback hit, a drought, a failed crop trial, a lender calling to demand payment, that voice would resurface. An embarrassment, a failure, a dreamer of ghosts. I spent a decade in that solitude. I learned that the earth doesn't care about your ego, it only cares about balance. I learned that to bring life back to a dead place, you have to understand the microscopic dance of the fungi, the hidden heartbeat of the nutrients, the silent language of the water table. I didn't just want to farm. I wanted to heal the planet 1 acre at a time. I obsessed over the science of restoration, studying the way ancient forests breathed, applying it to the scorched, modern landscapes of the world. I worked through the exhaustion, through the ridicule of the agricultural giants who told me my methods were unscientific nonsense, and through the crushing loneliness of being the only person who believed in a vision that others couldn't see. And then the world started to notice. It didn't happen overnight, but when it did, it was undeniable. My ridiculous methods became the blueprint for global land reclamation. The barren, Dust Bowl regions of the world began to turn emerald green under my systems. I wasn't just a farmer. I was the architect of new ecosystems. Success didn't bring me fame, it brought me purpose. 10 years after I walked away, I returned. I didn't come back in a limousine. I came back in a simple, dusty vehicle, driving toward the old family estate. But I wasn't the same man who had left. I was seasoned, calm, and carried the quiet strength of someone who had looked into the abyss and found life growing there. As I drove up the long, winding driveway, I saw them. My father, my brothers, my aunts, they were all gathered on the porch for a summer reunion. They looked different, they looked tired. The family estate, the pride of our lineage, was struggling. The soil here had turned to gray ash, the crops were stunted, and the very air felt heavy with the weight of a dying legacy. I pulled up to the gate. The silence was heavy. My father stepped forward, his brow furrowed. He looked at my clothes, then at my face, and for a second I saw a flicker of something, confusion perhaps, or a recognition he wasn't ready to admit. "Elias," he asked, his voice thinner than I remembered. "I'm back, father," I said. "What brings you home?" We haven't heard much, just rumors of some environmental work." He let out a small, dry laugh, attempting to reclaim the old hierarchy. "I suppose you finally realized that playing in the mud doesn't pay the bills." But he didn't finish the sentence, because at that moment, a convoy of black SUVs rolled quietly up the driveway, followed by a team of scientists and journalists. They weren't there for him. They were there for me. One of the lead reporters stepped out, holding a tablet. "Mr. Elias, the UN delegation is ready for the briefing on the Sahel Restoration Project. They want to discuss the implementation of your new irrigation model in the sub-Saharan belt." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was deafening. I watched the color drain from my brother's face. I watched my father's jaw tighten, not in anger, but in the sudden, crushing realization of what he had dismissed as a ridiculous whim. He looked at the gray, dying dirt of his own garden. Then he looked at the men who had traveled thousands of miles just to see the man who had turned deserts into forests. The poetic justice wasn't in seeing them suffer. It was in the realization that they had been fighting against the tide of history while I had learned to flow with it. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. "The soil here is tired, Father," I said softly, looking him directly in the eyes. "It's lost its spirit, just like we did when we stopped believing in things that couldn't be measured by a ledger." My father didn't argue. He couldn't. He looked down at the parched ground, and for the first time in my life, I saw a tear track through the dust on his cheek. It was a moment of profound regret, a silent acknowledgement that he had mistaken my passion for madness and my vision for vanity. I didn't come back to reclaim this land. I came back to heal it. As I turned to speak with the journalists, I realized the greatest lesson of my journey. They told me I was an embarrassment because I was different. They told me I would fail because I didn't follow their path. But the truth is, you cannot grow in a place where there is no room for the roots to expand. You have to be willing to be the seed that breaks the earth to find the light. I am no longer the boy chasing ghosts. I am the man who turned the ghosts into a garden. And as I looked out over the horizon, I knew that the most beautiful things in life are often the ones that everyone else told you were impossible.